king of Iron Fist Tournament. Enter the Tekken.
So for this video I'm going to play the Tekken games that were released on PS1, that's Tekkens 1, 2 and 3. Now the Tekken series is probably my favourite fighting game series, and like most people when it comes to their favourite fighting game series, it's because it's the one I mostly played as a kid and what introduced me to the genre. I primarily grew up playing Tekken 2 and Tekken 3 when that came out. The first Tekken game, however, was always a little bit elusive to me. I think I had one friend when I was a kid who had the game, but we'd always rather play the other two because, I don't know, we thought they were better because they came later on. So, for me personally, the original Tekken has always had this weird air of mystery to it. Like, the way the characters are all slightly different and it's the earlier form so it looks a bit more primitive. And here, I only recently picked this one up by the way, I have my very first copy of the original Tekken, at least in physical form. And what took me by surprise immediately is it comes in a cardboard box. I don't know how many PlayStation 1 games had this. It's an early PlayStation 1 game, so maybe it was something they were experimenting with for certain games? I don't really know. It's a cardboard box that opens like traditional, what do they call them? Jewel cases, that's it. And it's actually in pretty good quality. I don't know if that's normal. I don't know if these are normally quite battered up, original Tekken copies. I don't know, it's pretty interesting and it looks kinda neat. I was expecting when I saw it as a cardboard box online for it to be kinda beaten up and battered, but it seems pretty good quality. I kinda like the look of it. Inside we have a nice thick manual. That's often quite common over here though, because you have like a whole bunch of European languages in there, and I imagine that's the case with this. I don't think this is going to be like 100+ pages for the manual. Yeah, it's different languages, that's why. So recording this footage will be the first time I've ever put a significant amount of time into playing the original Tekken. I played it before, but because I didn't grow up with it, I haven't played it much. I know it originally released in arcades. I think that's been the case with every Tekken game up until the most recent one, Tekken 7, although I think Namco did recently announce that they won't be doing that in the future, so that makes sense. I guess arcades are dying, arcades are dying, arcades are almost completely dead by this point in 2020, but it was always kind of nice knowing that Tekken was still at its heart an arcade game. The PS1 release came along, I believe, in 1995, so it's an early release for the PlayStation 1, not long after launch. And with the PlayStation 1 generation, Tekken games were heavily associated with the console, even though they were on arcades as well, technically not being exclusive. They were the only way to play it at home, I believe. So let's check out Tekken 1. I'm looking forward to seeing what it's like. Now, this isn't the first time I've mentioned this, but I'm hoping someone relates when I say I find this early CG really quite creepy. Not creepy in the like, oh my god, I'm gonna have nightmares kind of way, just, I don't know, unsettling. I think that's the right word to use. It's the faces especially, when they move their mouths, it really freaks me out. Okay, what's this? Now, I've played Tekken 1 before, I'm certain it wasn't a shoot-'em-up game. So what's happened? Have I put the wrong disc in? Well, no. It turns out you actually play Gallagher to start with on Tekken 1 on PS1. Why? Well, there is actually a reason, but we'll get to that later on. And here you go. This is the whole menu screen. You've got to remember, this is an early PlayStation 1 game, so it's a little bit more limited than what many of us are used to. You've got arcade mode, 2-player mode, and test mode. At first I was like, well, there's no options, but that's in the test mode. The test mode seems to have a few more things going on for it. And whilst we're looking in the test mode, You've got things like stats here as well, so you can check your score, your time, that is how long it took you to complete arcade mode. That's all in here, which if you're into your fighting games, it's a cool thing to track, and it's a reason to keep playing, I guess, to try and beat your old time limits and scores. So one thing that made Tekken stand out in its early days, and even to this day actually, is that it doesn't use the typical control scheme for fighting games. With the Tekken series, and this will apply to the other games I look at too, each button corresponds to a character's limb. So for example, you've got right kick and left kick, right punch and left punch. In theory, you could watch another character do certain moves and have an idea of what buttons to press to do those moves. If they're using their left leg, then you know it's probably going to use the left kick button. It's an interesting concept, and it's obviously worked quite well because Tekken's still going strong to this day using the same control scheme. Also at the time, it was setting itself apart by being a 3D fighter. There are only a couple of those around at that time because, hell, 3D games had only been around for a little while at that point. Also, the stages themselves go on infinitely. There's no, arena, so you don't get knocked out of the arena. Like, say in Virtual Fighter, I believe if you get knocked out of the arena, you lose. That doesn't exist here, and there's no invisible wall or barrier. Although I believe that does happen if you end up too far apart from one another. I should have tested that when I was recording the footage, but I didn't think at the time. But yeah, I don't think you can actually go on forever as two characters going in the opposite direction until you look like ants. So yeah, a little bit of a limit, but generally speaking, these stages just keep going. To block an attack, you either press nothing, or you can press the directional button that's facing away from your opponent, so the back button, depending on what way you're facing, that would change, obviously. And in the game settings, you can change whether blocking blocks 100% the damage, or if a minimal amount of damage occurs, even when an attack is blocked. So it's nice to have those kind of options. If this isn't the system that you're used to with fighting games, it can take a little bit of getting used to, just pressing absolutely nothing at all, or just pressing back to avoid attacks. But it works quite well once you're kind of used to it. If you spend like one fight just doing your best to block everything, you'll find yourself getting used to it pretty quickly, actually. So I won't lie, the game is quite ugly. It's not as bad as what my memory says. I don't know, I remember when I saw footage of it when I was a kid, I thought it looked really terrible compared to the later Tekken games that came along. But actually the character models aren't as basic as I thought. Maybe in my mind I got it confused with the first Virtual Fighter game, which is really primitive, especially on certain systems. So the main game mode you're going to be playing, unless you're playing with a friend, is arcade mode. And this of course mimics the arcade game, where you select a character to play through the game as, and then each round will be a fight against another character, until you eventually get to a sub-boss. Every character kind of has a counterpart in this game. So as you can see here, for example, when I'm playing as Jack, your counterpart and sub-boss is Prototype Jack. These sub-bosses have a similar but slightly different moveset to their counterparts, but most of them don't feel like a completely different character in their own right. Hence why I've been using the term counterpart, because that's the best word I can think of to use to describe them in the original Tekken game. Your final boss is Heihachi, and upon beating him, you'll get an ending sequence, which is just a short CG cutscene that's unique to each character. Also, you will have unlocked the sub-boss to play as, so now I would be able to play as Prototype Jack, since I've played through the game as Jack now. So that's pretty cool. I don't think that was possible in the arcade original. You couldn't play as the sub-bosses or Heihachi, but they are available in this game. And it gives you a reason to try playing as every character, because you're going to want to try and unlock every character, as well as see all of their endings. Now, whilst we're on the topic of the characters and their endings, we may as well go over the basic storyline of the game. So we do have a main character, a protagonist of sorts, Kazuya Mishima. The primary antagonist is his father, Heihachi Mishima. Now, Heihachi is an evil bastard because he killed Kazuya's mother, his wife, and then carries Kazuya Mishima at 5 years old to the top of a cliff and throws him off of it, just to see if he can climb back up as a test of strength and survivability. This fall from the cliff activates what's called the Devil Gene, which becomes a major plot point for most Tekken games going forward, which is some kind of strange genetic connection to the devil. It's pretty strange already, and trust me, as the games go on, it gets weirder and weirder and way more anime, for no better other way to describe it. So yeah, with his Devil Gene activated, now Kazuya can use that to gain immense power and strength. Years later, Heihachi decides to announce his own martial arts tournament called the King of Iron Fist Tournament, and that is Tekken. That is this game. You are playing as either Kazuya or one of the other entrants into the King of Iron Fist Tournament. And every character is pretty unique. It's not all just about Kazuya. All of the characters have their own reasons for entering the tournament and wanting to prove themselves as, I don't know, best fighter in the world. I don't know why this one in particular is apparently the best, but it is, so that's what everyone wants to do. They want to win the King of Iron Fist tournament and be the King of Iron Fist. Good for them. With the cast of characters being so memorable, most of them stick around throughout the rest of the series because pretty much everyone is someone's favourite, which is a pretty cool thing. It's not just one or two main guys, even though the main storyline does revolve around the Mishima family. They all have their reasons, and they're all taken pretty seriously within the context of this world. It's also worth mentioning that each of the characters' fighting styles and movesets are based on real-world martial arts. There's not as many over-the-top or just outright impossible, ludicrous, almost magical moves in Tekken. Most of what you see could technically be emulated in real life. I mean, by someone extremely athletic, but possible still. Take note I said most, not all of it. Especially as the series will go on, we'll see more and more wild stuff start to happen. But for the first game at least, and in this time period, it's another little quirk that makes it stand out amongst the other fighting games. The least realistic part, however, isn't some of the more over-the-top moves, it's the fact that it's almost like there's no gravity. When you jump and when you're falling, it's all in like slow motion, like you're on the moon or on another planet. It's kind of strange. It's not something I particularly like about this. It's almost like jumping's a little bit overpowered at times, because you can jump over almost anything to dodge it. So I did get the crap kicked out of me, even on easy mode for a little while, on some of the later fights in the arcade mode. But it is the first time I've played a Tekken game in a while, to be fair, and once I started to get the hang of it, it wasn't too bad. But I would definitely say it feels like this is the most difficult Tekken game. Just based on playing this now and my memory of other games in the series, I'd say later games maybe make the easy difficulty quite a bit easier. They balance out the difficulty levels, I guess. And oh yeah, what was Galaga all about? Well, I mentioned that devil gene that Kazuya has. Well, there's a devil version of him in the game. Unlike later games where this is generally a separate character, in the original Tekken it's just a palette swap of Kazuya, basically an alternate costume for him. I can't remember whether you just have to beat Galaga or you have to get like a perfect score on Galaga. Either way, the reason it's at the start of the game, other than for fun, is to unlock this alternate costume. So yeah, kind of primitive, especially in the presentation department, but all the essentials are there. It's noticeably and obviously Tekken. It's interesting how there are some fairly noticeable differences in character designs for characters that came back in later generations of the game. I wouldn't say you necessarily have to check this out unless you have a particular interest in video game history, especially in terms of fighting games. But the next two Tekken games that come along, I can tell you right away, are better than this one. So it kind of, I don't know. It's not forgettable, but there's no reason to go and play the original Tekken unless you have a particular interest in doing so. Following on from Tekken, just the next year on, I believe, we get Tekken 2. Now, as you could probably guess, it's the sequel to Tekken, and it's the first Tekken game that I personally played. I have a lot of fond memories of this one, so let's get into it. Well, the intro this time shows off the characters in much more visually appealing CG. Yeah, it's still noticeably aged by today's standards, but it's way better than the first Tekken. Actually, I'd say all around, graphically, this is noticeably improved right from the get-go, and throughout the whole thing, presentation in general is much, much better. A massive improvement here for Tekken 2. Another thing you'll immediately notice is there are way more game modes. It's not just arcade and 2-player now. You've got a whole bunch of them here. And I suppose I'll use this chance to mention that now you can bring up the command list from the pause menu. You couldn't do that in the first Tekken. You just had to, I don't know the character's moves. I think in the manual you could check a character's move list. Whether that included all of them or not, I don't know. But here, just pause the game in the middle of a fight and you can see the moves of the character that you're playing as. All of them nicely listed and easy to understand. And each character has a larger moveset, which means more possible combos as well. The characters all feel much more unique, which is actually an impressive feat because they all felt pretty unique in the original Tekken as well. Though as we just saw in the original, the sub-boss counterpart characters were pretty similar to whoever you'd have been playing as to unlock them. In Tekken 2, even they feel a lot more unique. They have similarities, but it's not as obvious. So story-wise, the game carries right off from the first game. We're set, I think, 2 years after the original. Kazuya is back, but now he's your final boss. He's the bad guy. He's the official winner of the first game, which means his ending, which was him throwing his father off a cliff in revenge, is the official ending of Tekken 1. Turns out, though, he wasn't really a good guy, and the Mishima Zaibatsu, which is the company that runs the King of Iron Fist tournament and does all other kind of stuff, I don't really know what, but now they're worse than ever. It's even more corrupt and evil under Kazuya than it was under Heihachi. I'm guessing this is because of the whole devil gene thing that was going on, because while I did say the last boss is Kazuya, he's actually your second to last fight in the game. You then face Devil himself. So this time we've got another King of Iron Fist tournament, now run by Kazuya after discovering that his father Heihachi is still alive. And now we've got Tekken 2. Once again, each character has their own story and their own reasons for entering the King of Iron Fist Tournament 2. So in order for this video to not be hours long, we won't start sitting there and listing all of them off. But once again, it's mostly the Mishima family that this revolves around, but all the characters have their place. None of them are completely irrelevant or ignored. We actually have quite a large selection of characters. Almost everyone from the previous game appears, plus I think around 8 new characters as well. The arcade game works exactly the same as the first game, as does the basic control scheme, so we won't go over that again. One nice thing for the arcade mode is now every character has their own ending. We didn't get that in the first game, so it's a pretty cool improvement, and it gives you a reason to play through the game as absolutely everyone to see everyone's ending. General gameplay and the animations feel a lot smoother. It's one of those things that's difficult to describe because it's not something you can easily show, it's just something you notice while playing. It feels easier but in a fairer way. like this is almost how they wanted it to be originally. I'll take some time here as well just to note the soundtrack. It's very memorable and absolutely awesome.
Hey, yo! You win!
And that doesn't just go for Tekken 2, that goes for all three of these games I'm looking at today. I've always liked atmospheric music that matches a character or scenario, and for the most part with the Tekken games, they really nail that. Everywhere that the original Tekken set standards, Tekken 2 surpassed them in almost every way, making it one of the best fighting games for the time period. They had the formula with Tekken, and they just improved on it in every way with Tekken 2. There's nothing to complain about. I'd recommend it highly. It's a really cool game with a nice cast of characters, interesting story, although it doesn't really delve into it that much. Much later games down the line will really go for it in terms of the storytelling element of this, but this doesn't really try that hard. You just get the end cutscenes, and you almost have to just kind of know what the context of those cutscenes are. Tekken 2 is a fantastic game, but it's almost completely overlooked these days because what came next was somehow even better. Tekken 3. I'd go as far to say that Tekken 3 is the absolute peak of the Tekken series. This is the most popular version of the game, it's the most critically acclaimed version of the game. For a 3D fighter, it's pretty close to perfection. The only real competition I could think of would be the Virtua Fighter games that were coming out almost alongside Tekken at the time. But I think the big difference with Tekken is its presentation style makes it stand out to more casual audiences. It felt like everyone played Tekken, and everyone had their favourite character. Almost like the Street Fighter 2 craze of the early 90s, Tekken was the late 90s PlayStation 1 equivalent of that. It almost felt like Tekken 2 was flawless, but then Tekken 3 came along so much better that it made you realise what the problems were in the original games to begin with. 3 home runs in a row for Namco. We're now set around 20 years after the first games, and the official ending to Tekken 2 was Heihachi won the tournament, beating his son, and taking back his company, the Mishima Zaibatsu. Some evil godlike being called Ogre is going around killing / abducting / absorbing fighters. It's not made clear in every case, but having the big time jump plus this Ogre villain was actually a pretty good excuse to have a big character shake-up. We get a ton of new characters and a few returning old ones, plus a few new characters that are the same as old characters in terms of gameplay, but new characters in terms of the story. This time, the King of Iron Fist tournament has been set by Heihachi in an attempt to gather a whole bunch of great fighters together to try and lure Ogre in so he can steal Ogre's power in some way. How has he planned to do that? I don't know. Some over-the-top stuff. In-game, the story is only really told through end-game cutscenes that last barely a minute, often less. It's really starting to get quite complicated, and unless you were to, I don't know, actually read up on this stuff, you wouldn't really know what the hell's going on. I didn't when I was a kid. When I saw these endings, I just thought they looked cool. I didn't really know what was happening throughout 99% of them. Or I guess that's not the right way to put it. I knew what was happening, I just didn't know why. Famously, this game is the debut of Eddie Gordo, or the Button Mash King. People loved playing as Eddie and hated playing against him. With the Capoeira-inspired fighting style and general ease to play as, especially against computer opponents, and have really cool looking moves come out of him, managed to get a lot of people's attention. I know a lot of people that started, or at least most of their memories of Tekken, are from Tekken 3, and for a lot of them, the standout character is Eddie. Whether you like him or not, he's a really important character in terms of gaining a new fan base for the series. For better or worse, this is when the game became a lot more accessible. If you want to have an easy time, when you flick this down to easy difficulty, it's definitely the easiest title in the series so far. We somehow managed to be greeted with even more game modes, now miles ahead of the 2 game modes that are available in the first game. Arcade mode works pretty much exactly the same. The only difference now is you don't have a sub-boss. They've made all the characters as unique as possible rather than having counterparts for each character. So now, when you're unlocking the new characters, they just unlock in a set order. Plus there are a couple of bonus characters in there that are unlocked through other means as well, like Gon. Gon's awesome, look at this guy. I think he's directly from a manga series. I'd love to see Gon again in a future Tekken game.
Final round. Fight.
His whole fighting style is absolutely nuts. The way most people would have got him would be by playing the Tekken Ball mode, which is a volleyball mode. I'll just show a screenshot here, because I didn't get any footage of it, because you do have to beat the game with, I think, all the characters, or a certain number of times. Yeah, you either beat the game with all the characters, or you have to unlock all the characters first, and then it's the next thing you unlock. Oh, whatever. It's one of those. I would have been sitting for hours doing it, and I almost caught myself getting to that point, but I gotta make this video at some point, you know? And speaking of extra modes, straight off the bat you get Tekken Force mode, which plays like a Streets of Rage, Final Fight, Double Dragon style side-scrolling beat-em-up. But instead you're just playing as a Tekken character and moving around using Tekken controls. It's a little bit awkward, but it's a welcome addition. It's something completely different. And it's pretty fun. You can get sidetracked pretty easily trying to beat this. Now we've got the first major changes in gameplay. The control scheme is still pretty much the same thing, but now they've introduced sidestepping, so you can take advantage of the 3D environment more, which goes on to make this more unique as a 3D fighting game. Also, the jumping has been drastically improved. You now jump in a more realistic manner, certainly at least more realistic than the first 2 games, where I'd start to worry if the character would ever come down. So no anti-grav here, you can't just dodge half of the moves by jumping ludicrously high into the air anymore. Out of the 3 Tekken games on PlayStation 1, I'd say Tekken 3 is the one I put the most hours into. Probably because it introduced one of my favourite characters to play as, Hwoarang. I hope I'm saying his name right. And I have a feeling that that's the case for a lot of other players too. Not that he was their favourite character, but that they found their favourite character in Tekken 3, and it's potentially why, to this day, this is almost the standard set of characters. We're still in this generation. We haven't had another major time leap in the Tekken series to introduce a whole bunch more characters. And you could argue Tekken 3 in particular does lack a bit of difficulty for a fighting game, but it does make it more accessible too. You didn't have to play it too seriously and worry about all the little details and nuances of fighting games. You could pick it up and play it and button mash and do okay. It's almost like with Tekken 3, there's at least one character that will match your button mashing style. Against a good player or on a higher difficulty, it won't work. But if you just want to breeze through the game and have a bit of fun, you can do that. And I think with some fighting games, they take themselves a little bit too seriously, and you don't have that option. There's nothing wrong with letting a casual audience have a bit of fun with these games as well, and feel like they're dominating, and that they're good at it, even if technically they're not. Now, I just sunk quite a lot of time into playing Tekken 3. I thought I was just going to capture a little bit of footage because I've already played it so much in the past, but it ended up eating me right up. That nostalgia got straight to me, and I poured a little bit too much time into it. Actually, this video is going to come out later than I originally anticipated, purely thanks to how good this damn game is. So we'll put it away before I lose even more time to it. In a future video, I'll look at some of the other Tekken games that have come out later than this. You've got Tekken 4, 5, 6 and 7, but you've also got things like, what was it called? Dark Resurrection? Is that right? I've got it behind me. Let me make sure it's right. Dark Resurrection, which is just Tekken 5 really. And that Nina Williams spin-off game, that'll be an interesting one. I never touched that before. I'm not sure how I'll split those videos yet, whether I'll do it all in one big bundle. I think I've kind of explained the basis of Tekken now, and 4, 5, 6 and 7, the gameplay is just not the same, but it's based around the same concepts. I'd just be explaining the same thing I have in this video over and over again. So maybe I'll just do all of the other Tekken games in one video, because I'll likely have less to say about each one individually. But instead of rambling about what I might do in the future, I'll actually get to the future and start doing it and looking at some other games to record footage of and play, and keep going in my stupid quest to play all these games. I'm not even going to get through all the ones I have, let alone every one ever made. Oh well, I'll give it a shot still. Put these back.